Welcome to Come Draw from the Well. My name is Victoria Fisher, and today I am joined by Cynthia Hofmann-Coale, owner, founder, critical care clinician extraordinaire at the Well of Life Center.
Yeah.
And today we're going to have a discussion, a dialogue about diets and fads and lifestyles. Like, what's the truth, what's not truth. So we're just going to be talking, figuring out what we've seen for clients, what has worked for clients, and just how we've come to those conclusions. So hopefully you'll find some good information from this, and we'll get to have a good discussion.
Yeah.
So what is your definition of a diet versus lifestyle, would you say?
So I've been doing this for 17 years now, right? I mean, professionally.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been in the healthcare industry or invested in lifestyle versus, diet, fads, healthcare-y type things, whether it's medically derived or whether it's holistically derived, my entire life. It's always been kind of incorporated in the very essence of my being, right? So I've come to the clearer understanding of what is considered lifestyle and what is considered diet when you look at historically the cycles of how diets show up, right?
Okay.
So diets start when someone gets a creative idea of how best to fuel the human host, and with the intention of affecting something: weight loss, metabolism, energy, performance, athletically, whatever, right? So we know that there always has to be a motivation behind a diet.
Okay.
Most diets are formulated from personal experiences, and so they use their own personal experiences as a template, and they say within that template, okay, if you do these things in this order and implement it over this amount of time, you're going to get this result because they themselves have received the benefits of it.
Okay.
Now, the problems with diets is that if you can get a network of people who are operating kind of from that same vein, you'll always get the results. And therefore, it makes it look like the diet works.
Right.
But it can only work temporarily or get the results that they're desiring for short term, but it can't be life sustaining. That's where lifestyle has to come in.
That's the key word there. Life sustaining.
Life sustaining. That's the difference, right? So diets are designed with a purpose in mind, but they're not designed to be able to be sustaining because they take away the willful right of each individual's lifestyle, their personal preferences, the things that make up their stresses of days in and day out influences, those types of things.
Which will always change because we always have some type of stress, or there's new levels, new things that we're experiencing.
Sure.
So then also it's temporary, it's transient. It's not something that should be.
Yeah, it can't be concrete,
okay.
Right? Now you can have guidelines, which I think are really important. What are the things that metabolically are important to keep the human host optimal based on the way God designed each one of us? The importance of proteins, amino acids, minerals, hydration, essential fatty acids. So those principles need to be applied in a way that is honoring to each individual person. But you can't put everyone under the same umbrella and expect them to personally succeed because we're unique. We're bio-individuals, right?
Bio-individuals,
right. We're unique beings created by a creator that sets each one of us uniquely apart.
Yeah.
And then you factor in genetics, you factor in nationalities, you factor in regions of origin, you factor in elements of change, meaning what's happening. Is it spring, summer, winter, fall?
Yeah.
Gender, age, factor age. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you just finished your 40th year.
Yes, you just finished your 60th.
I just finished my 60th. There we go. I could be your mother.
Yes.
But the truth is that where I was at 40 is very different principally than where I'm at 60.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But foundationally, meaning the things that keep my body optimal are still exactly the same.
Yeah. So what we've been finding with our clients is that there's kind of like a baseline diet or lifestyle that is sustaining, that is concrete, that promotes optimal health, wellness, and vitality.
Sure.
Based though on all those factors that you said, environment, stressors, lifestyle, seasonal, regional, all of that, we may have to make some variations, add some things, take some things away, but those foundational key nutrient foods are always there.
Always.
Right.
Yeah, and if we're good at doing what we need to be doing seasonally and regionally, then we're never in a point of deficiency. Now, the problem that I think also falls in volume, the amount of food.
Yes.
That
absolutely.
people think that they need to consume in order to be able to optimize a healthy body.
Absolutely.
And I think historically, we've failed in whether it's in the allopathic community or in the holistic community, we have failed to teach portion control. We have failed to teach that we really don't need to be consuming throughout the course of the day.
Right. Yeah.
Our ancestors were lean. They had large quantities of muscle mass versus visceral or subcutaneous fat.
Right.
And they were able to sustain stresses being placed on them and in them.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
They may not have lived as long, but they lived better quality of life.
Right.
Big difference.
Yeah. And I've even seen that in the medical community. Just because you live longer does not mean that now we live better.
No.
And sustaining life almost artificially is not the same as truly feeding the body, sustaining wellness,
Correct.
Sustaining optimal health and function.
Yeah.
So I want to touch on one thing that you mentioned with the kind of like eating all day long. Now we have a lot of people who come into our office and say, I have to eat every few hours. Like I have hypoglycemia. Like I feel like I need to eat all day long or these things happen. What are you seeing, or what is that showing within the body, and what is that actually doing to the body? Like what is that reflecting, and what is eating like that all day long kind of creating within the system?
Well, I think it comes foundationally down to stress mechanisms, right? Because our body doesn't know the difference between perceived threat and actual threat.
Right.
Right? So it doesn't understand that.
Yeah.
It just knows that it's under some sort of threat, some sort of stress. And in that state, it produces these hormones that require, that they're looking for balance is really what they're doing.
Got it, yeah.
And so when the adrenal body, the adrenal gland, which is a gland that sits on top of the kidney, is in a state of distress, it's like throwing pebbles into a pond, right? And so when the adrenal starts putting out these stress signals, because again, it doesn't know, am I really, is there really a lion in the middle of this room, or am I just imagining that there's a lion in the middle of this room? Either way, it needs to respond to that threat.
Yeah.
And so it begins putting out these stress signals. Now, when it puts out the stress signals, it's relying on electrolytes, minerals that are recorded in the cell-to-cell dialogue to calm it down, to create that sense of it's okay, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's the mom coming up and stroking the child, soothing and stroking the child. It's okay. You don't have to worry.
Right.
Now, when it sends out that stress mechanism, or that sends out that 911 call, and it's looking for those electrolytes, the kidneys get this false signaling through its reverberation.
Because they're sitting right on top of the kidney, so by proximity.
It's like, it starts contracting. It starts, almost like it's pulsating in this own independent life of its own, and it begins urinating more frequently.
Yeah, so people who pee through the night, people who are waking up frequently, it's not your kidneys.
It's not.
It's not your bladder. It's not, I have an overactive bladder, or for men, my prostate's enlarged. It could be this adrenal dysregulation.
Correct.
That's having a downward effect onto the kidneys.
Downward causation. Yeah. And then they end up peeing out their electrolytes. And so we're constantly in a state of electrolyte deficiency, mineral deficiency.
Right.
And then the body uses an all day long dialogue in its adrenal state. During the day, our adrenals operate us, right? It's our fight and flight mechanism.
That sympathetic nervous
Right.
system, right?
And when we go to bed at night, our thyroid is supposed to take over. But if the adrenal's holding itself hostage because it thinks it's under the, whether you're sleeping or not, right? Because they're not sleeping well, they're getting inconsistency in recovery. Thyroid isn't getting its proper baton being handed off to drive into a deep parasympathetic
Like melatonin and serotonin and
all of those things that need to be, thank you very much,
Yeah.
those neurotransmitters that need to be activated.
Right.
What ends up happening is the adrenal continue to bearing the weight, drives that kidney into a state of exhaustion. Mineral deficiency is out because it's constantly flushing.
Mm-hmm.
And we're back to that, vicious cycle of stress and then recovery and stress and recovery.
Right.
And eventually you can't recover.
Right.
And so you begin struggling with the symptomatology or the advanced presentation of a body that is sympathetically charged and now cannot go into parasympathetic healing, and we get a diseased pathology.
Yeah. So what that actually can look like is some people have that kind of reactive hypoglycemia. So like they have to eat to keep that mineral electrolyte dialogue going.
It's a lie.
So right. Yeah.
Because it's not sustaining.
Right.
They're eating every 2 hours, but they're really only eating the addiction that the adrenal is needing, but they're not solving the problem.
Right. So then we do that prolonged. Eventually we can become stressed to a point where now we have this sympathetic dominance, we have cortisol overload, we have insulin resistance, which ultimately brings us into the symptomatology of diabetes or metabolic syndrome or somewhere along those lines.
Sure. Heart disease, high
Cardiovascular,
cardiovascular issues,
Right.
right? So, and the metabolic syndrome is one of the most under-discussed and under-diagnosed problems of our day.
Yeah, because a lot of people will present with that long before they're diabetic.
Absolutely.
Long before they have cardiovascular disease, they have these signals that the body is metabolically out of balance, that there's stress. So it could be, like you said, the waking up frequently, having to urinate, the cortisol belly, like that kind of spare tire.
And they don't even have to be heavy to make that happen.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a common misconception that a lot of people think that that they have to be overweight in order to have metabolic disease or to have like blood sugar dysregulation or things like that, or that they have to eat sugar to have blood sugar dysregulation, but you don't. Or you are eating it in hidden sources, like you're drinking wine to go to bed to help you fall asleep because you're...
Calm you down.
Yeah.
Takes away that, because I've had a stressful life, I need a glass of wine.
Exactly. Or you're eating lots of bread and pasta or those quick fuel carbs that are shooting into your bloodstream, all of this influx of glucose, but there's nothing behind it. There's not that fire burning to sustain it.
And those people who are eating every 2 hours are not eating a protein, a fat, and a good carbohydrate. Like they're not eating that balance to fuel them every 2 hours, right?
So
they're having the coffee, they're having the muffin, they're having the bagel first thing in the morning when they get up, because they're starving. When they get up, they're starving.
Yeah, so they need something.
Yeah. And so if we're actually properly balanced, we should not get up in the morning and be starving.
Right.
If we are really metabolically sound, we should be able to fast beyond our wake up time. And fasting doesn't mean, okay, I'm going to have a cup of coffee.
Yes, because coffee, for those of you who don't know, coffee will have the same cortisol response and the same insulin response as sugar, refined sugar and carbohydrates do. Yeah. So you're sending the same exact messages even though you're not consuming food. Yeah. Yeah, you're sending that same
But they're saying,
thing.
coffee's made with water.
Yeah.
We get that argument. Tea's made with water. Like we get the, for 17 years I've been hearing the same argument. I'm like, wow, can we find a different script?
Yeah.
But we can't find a different script because it's still the fad. It's still the lie that is perpetuated. Okay. Yeah. That's the difference between like a diet and a fad, right? What are some of the fads that have withstood the test of time? Anything liquid is considered water.
that's actually medical as well. So that's not just fad.
Yeah.
That is, so as a former nurse, when we were doing your eyes and nose, your intake and output, you would monitor your patient's fluid intake.
Yeah.
No matter what it was.
No matter.
You would record whatever fluid went into their body, so whether it was ingestion or IV fluids, and then you would record their urinary output. So they did not care what that liquid was.
No.
So we were told to register the coffee that you drank, the tea that you drank, the soda that you had, the juice that you had, all of which are diuretics, by the way. So
right.
you're actually losing water by drinking those. So medically, that's actually considered
well, and you know, it's interesting
water.
because that shift happened in the allopathic community. That shift happened when people were doing long stays in hospital.
The residency.
The
which
residency.
Is a whole another topic
right?
to get on. Yeah, absolutely.
Because when that shift happened, then they started, because there used to be when women, and I'm going to go back to the 30s, 40s, even early 50s, when they would go in to have children.
Which wasn't very often because people were still having a lot of home births, midwives, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Know?
So hospital stays were kind of unique and kind of carved out as being special events.
Got it, yeah.
Right? So that was back 30s, 40s, 50s, right? That was a special event.
Mm-hmm.
And when they stayed, they didn't have cafeterias like they have today,
yeah,
right?
People would bring in food.
People would bring in food.
Yeah.
And there were local communities that provided foods for the people who were staying there. So they were normally home cooked meals, and they weren't accessible throughout the course of the day.
Right. Well, like maybe twice a day.
Twice a day.
Yeah.
They might bring them breakfast, and they'd bring them an early dinner.
Yeah.
But they didn't bring them 3 meals per day. They did not bring them snacks.
Right.
And when and if they had coffee, it was normally only with the meal.
And it wasn't 16, 20, 24 ounces
It was
of
not.
coffee.
It was in a coffee cup.
Like a
you know,
6 to 8
sweet
ounce
little,
normal.
yes. And
Yeah.
and it was like those little teacups that you see, on shows that are dated back then. Even when you watch Westerns and they're drinking coffee by the fireside, they're drinking coffees that are like 4 to 6 ounces cups. Like they're not drinking those big, Friends mugs.
Right.
Like you saw like on the show Friends.
Mm-hmm.
That was another thing, a fad that came in.
Yeah, the whole coffee shop thing and how now
that's when that took off.
Chains and franchises that have come from that.
Yeah. So when you think about these even fads in the medical community, they are indeed fads because historically they were never intended to be that way.
Yeah, and they're not really doing the studies on those things either. They're not looking at, okay, what is the long-term ramification or what is even the short-term ramification on this patient in this setting with that. The
additional stress. How does that bring about healing?
Right.
If their body is consuming food throughout the course of the day, at any given time, with any push of the button, pick up the phone, friends coming to visit, food being readily available.
Right.
If the body is by default going to, hey, I need to digest, it's not healing. It will always choose by default to go to digestion. It won't. The immune system, 70 to 80% of it being in the gut. We're talking about lifestyle versus diet, right?
Yeah.
So 70 to 80% of the immune system is in the gut. That's not by accident. Yeah. That's with an intentional purpose to say, hey, if the largest amount of immune help we have offered to us is in our gut, then shouldn't we be eating to feed that, to support that, to enrich its function? Mm-hmm. And so if we're eating throughout the course of the day, we're suppressing the immune system, which brings us back to the heightened, disease pathology that we have in our culture today.
Yeah, and also the eating like right before you go to bed or later at night, the snacking at night, I have to have something before I go to sleep. You're taking your parasympathetic mode out of that the immune conversation.
Yeah,
you're not
absolutely.
healing, you're not restoring, you're going into that digestive mode.
Yeah, so you're going to bed and by 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe your body can visit the parasympathetic healing, but by that time, the liver's already begun its dumping of whatever toxins it's been holding on to.
Right.
It's now activating the large intestines to say, hey, we've got a process to get this out first thing in the morning. Mm-hmm. The chances of getting an immune support in the middle of the night,
slim to none at that
slim
point.
to none,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's a vicious cycle that is presented itself. So what we have found over the course of time and through experience is that if we look at the genetics of the human host, we can survive on one meal a day. And I'm talking a large caloric food meal that is consumed over at least an hour's period of time.
Okay.
They did not, if we look at historically, they usually had one big meal per day.
Which was usually not late at night.
It was
usually
not mid-afternoon.
Yeah.
And it was a dining experience. They were not eating quickly. It was not fast food.
Right.
And it was family oriented. It was sitting the body down. It was drawing family in. Even stressful conversations that can happen at the family dinner table.
Which
right?
Anybody sit at the family dinner table anymore?
Right.
Yeah.
But even those could be withstood in the middle of the meal because they weren't operating in stress all the time.
Right.
So they could have those stressful conversations at the meal. They could talk and have dialogue, and conversation could be had at the meal.
Right.
More difficult to do today, right?
Absolutely.
So one meal, 1 hour's period of time, large caloric intake, usually anywhere from 2,500 to 3,200 calories in that meal. And it was sustaining because then they would go into fast through the night. And all of that would be used to fuel the body, to restore the systems, to get the body to where it was self-healing and self-regulating.
Right.
And then they would get up with the sun in the summertime. Same thing in the fall. The work hours would be a little bit different because of the time changes.
Yeah.
And then they might break their fast, but they would not consume a break fast.
So, like, they wouldn't have like a huge meal.
They would not.
It would be just something to kind of stoke the fires metabolically, to kind of get the fire burning, get things churning.
Kindling.
So they
not a log.
Right. Okay. The log was the big midday meal.
Correct.
Right. So with that in mind, I'm just wondering. Okay, I know there's actually a fad now of people doing the one meal a day. That's the thing to kind of do from a fitness standpoint, from a blood sugar standpoint, that kind of thing. Is that in today's culture and lifestyle actually sustainable? Where it was maybe 100 years ago.
It's more. You'd have to have an optimal body to sustain that.
Okay.
And now
so you can't jump into that to become optimal. You have to actually become optimal and then do that. Okay.
Now I've got a handful of clients that do that and have done that successfully. We've navigated them to that, and they've successfully done it. Kept the lean body, muscle mass is intact. They're aging really well. Their disease pathology is no longer something we're entertaining because the body is restoring itself. All of those things are positive results from that. But most clients, we make that transition to 3 meals per day, 5 to 7 hours in between, and a 12-hour fast.
Yeah, and I think I've seen the best results in terms of, just because of, again, lifestyle, environmental, emotional stressors, that clients tend to respond best to that.
They do.
But
the amount that's in each meal is also so much less than what they're historically desiring to eat, right?
Absolutely.
So when I say, your meat should be the palm of your hand, the thickness of your hand, and they go, no, you mean the hand? I go, no, the palm.
Thank God I have big hands.
Yeah. And she's been saying that since day one, mind you. But yes. But understand that we've done metabolic balance together, right? We've done it, and we both have sent in our information. We got our weight per recommendation based on the metabolic model, and grams per protein. You are asked, because of your height, because of your genetics, you are asked to consume more grams per meal than I am.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Our metabolic demands are in fact different.
Right.
There is no one size fits all there.
And what's interesting is that when we measured out, how much of the protein were you asked to eat?
I was very sad. It's like
very
for dinner, my dinner portion is 140 grams of protein, which equates to about just under 5 ounces uncooked.
Right.
Which is actually a decent sized portion.
Right. About the size of your palm.
Yes, it is about the size of my palm. I know, and that's why I was like, yeah, I have
And she's
palms.
like, I used to love that idea. Now I'm like, now there's the reality. Because we didn't ever even really follow that reality, did we?
No, and that's what I found actually. So me coming on board initially as a client in my health journey, I ate well, but I ate a lot. Like, you overdo.
You were an athlete.
Yeah, I wasn't.
So
was operative.
Right, but I'm saying you had that mentality.
Exactly.
And you carried that mentality post-child, nursing
college
school.
Athletic, all of that,
Yeah. And so you carried that mentality and you brought that into what you thought was your wellness plan, right?
Right.
And I had to come in with the bad news to go,
But
it
that
changed
just goes,
everything.
It does, but it goes to show that you can be eating the right foods, but portion control does matter.
Yeah,
so we're not saying you have to weigh out every single thing and count calories.
Yeah, because we're not talking
like
Weight Watchers or anything like that. I'm not talking about weighing it in that fashion. When the Metabolic Balance Program, when we found the Metabolic Balance Program, and it spoke to the heart of the well, when it spoke to what our intention was in the life of our clients, it was a huge gift.
Yeah,
because so many of our clients, we were writing at the, we've come a long way, right?
And meal plans.
We were writing meal plans and we were, recipes and cooking classes, and all of those things were such blessings in the beginning part of our journey. But what has been so wonderful is we spent a lot of time writing these meal plans. Well, when we found a company that allowed us to speak not only to lifestyle, but also to proper metabolic dieting without fad, because mind you, they're getting a lot of pushback because there's a lot of people who are coming in with fake models to their algorithms that has historically been successful in Germany, because that's where they originate. Hospitals in Germany use their model in developing plans for their patients. That's how they keep their patients out of the hospital.
If only we incorporated something like that lifestyle-wise in the American,
and so system. When we found it and we looked at the evidence of their success, I can remember we had this heavens parted, God shone a light down, and we both all went, oh. Right, it was like we'd been waiting for that.
Yeah.
And God had already had it in play. It was already in Europe.
Right.
And then when they made the transition to come to the United States is when we got on board.
Yeah.
And it's been a game changer in the life of our clients
Absolutely.
Who follow it. Those who follow it.
Yes. Yeah, that's the thing. So we touched on metabolic balance, but I just want to touch on a few other things, like the whole fads, like keto. Paleo, whole food, plant-based.
Well, and a lot of the people who are doing the one meal per day are doing the whole plant-based thing.
Yeah.
And that's an unfortunate thing. But again, we have to remember what the agenda is, right? There's always an agenda behind every fad or every dietary recommendation, as we talked about earlier in the show. And there is this push to get us away from the consumption of meat.
Yes. Now it's infiltrated into politics and government, and it's not just the save the animals thing. And
now it's to save the environment.
Right.
As if God had no clue what he was doing when he invented cows that fart. Right. What was he thinking?
What was he thinking?
Well, what was he thinking? Know? I mean, what was he thinking when he invented the sun that was going to put cancer on people? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, we choose to operate from a very different model, praise God, that we do.
Absolutely.
And we don't get caught up in all of that.
Yeah.
But the unfortunate thing with these diets is that it doesn't consider, really, again, just because you get really great results in some models of the human host under the ketogenic diet, doesn't mean that all human hosts should be, all those in human form should be consuming a ketogenic diet, right?
Now, the history with keto is it is a medically based model that was used to treat type 1 diabetes before the discovery of insulin and before understanding what was going on. So when we take it and put it into that model,
right,
it could work possibly very well.
right.
The studies that show success for keto are studied in men, not women, who have menstrual cycles and who have cyclical hormones, who have vastly different bodies
Totally,
than men.
yeah. And I am not a fan of the ketogenic diet in the life of the woman unless she is carefully monitored, and it is done in the wintertime.
Huh.
A keto,
okay, yeah.
right?
Yeah,
a ketogenic, and that's the only time I will allow a female client of mine to go into a ketogenic state is in the wintertime.
Yeah. So the reasoning
Because
with
again,
that, though, is what's available seasonally.
Correct.
Seasonally, we have
We should not be
protein,
consuming salads
and berries
in the middle of the winter.
Right.
But we can, right?
Because
so
it's
just because
there.
we can doesn't mean
That
we should.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? But the only time that it is good for a woman, and again, historically, all human form were in states of ketogenic presentation.
Natural ketosis, right.
Natural ketosis in the wintertime.
Right.
And then when green life started coming back into, the fields and in the woods and we began yielding from that crop, is when we would break the ketogenic state and we would bring the body back to proper metabolic form.
Yeah, and start replenishing those micronutrients, those minerals and electrolytes that they may not be there in the full state of their capacity within a ketogenic diet.
Correct.
So,
and a lot of people in the cancerous symptomatology will do now micro and macro diets, you know, because what they're trying to do is put their bodies into these false states
of ketosis
to try to go after, again, the cancerous symptomatology, right? The presentation.
Now, is that, so again, I can speak to some clients that I have who medically are actually being guided because of and when we talk about cancerous symptomatology, the metabolic demand is very different from somebody who's not in that state.
That's correct.
So that may be something that would be helpful for that person, that bio individual.
Correct.
In that time.
Yeah.
So.
And one of the things that we found is that you'll know within the first week whether or not it's beneficial. It's normally within that first week. How do they respond when you begin to remove nutrient, demands and replace it with something else? And if they do not have the optimal presentation during that first week, then what we're looking for, we normally know that they can't, and they shouldn't, because it will just it's going to be a nightmare in recovery.
Right, absolutely.
And we've noticed that over the course of time.
Yeah,
there's
definitely.
no doubt. But I'm not, again, when we go to paleo, again, there's aspects of paleo that are historically great for the human form.
Yeah.
Right?
But also genetically, because there's not, so for instance, a lot of people who are of Asian descent or African descent don't necessarily have great genetics to digest dairy.
Correct.
So dairy's not in the paleo.
Well, and it wasn't
model.
it wasn't in their cultured diet either.
Right.
Goat's milk was.
Vastly different
profile. It's more like breast milk, right? So goat's milk was in those diets, but not cows.
Right.
Let's be real, right? So if we understand our genetics and we understand, and I don't really care how far generationally you are at from your original source. We're all sourced from Adam and Eve. We can talk about that at another time.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So we're all Mediterranean. Which, by the way, I believe that to be so even in my, white Anglo-Saxon, Western European,
yes.
And then we did 23andMe and found out that I was,
somewhere
along the African,
Yeah, exactly. Because
we're just genetically all over the place, right?
Yeah.
But we're from one seed and that's his, right?
Yeah.
So we're all coming from the same source. But there is a demand that happens within the DNA based on those, again, appointments of genetics.
Yeah, but then we could go on and on about even the epigenetics. So what is our environment telling us? What are our genes? What are our stressors telling our genes? What are our emotions telling our genes?
Oh, that's
Oh, that's coming. That's coming. That podcast is coming.
That's my baby, right?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
of 17 years, I have watched physical bodies literally lose the ground that they have won simply because of a trauma. And it absolutely motivated me and fueled me to see the influence of the emotional profile.
Yeah.
And again, food is medicine.
Yeah.
Right?
Food absolutely.
But people also use food as medicine.
Mm-hmm.
To kill emotions. They'll say, you know, I stress eat.
Yeah. Looking for a dopamine response, because that's actually now what I'm
the big
seeing
thing.
Is what foods can push dopamine instead of actually getting to the root source of why you may be dopamine deficient. We won't get into the whole EMF and technology and all that yet. That's also coming, and how that impacts that. So just one last thing, just because we're running out of time, but I want to have a quick little chat about the whole vegan, vegetarian versus animal protein.
Yeah.
And what even just a very small snippet of your experience of being vegetarian.
Yeah, I was. And then I was 85 pounds lying on a couch and dying.
Right.
And the phone call that changed my life was you need to eat fish 3 times a day. And I nearly died.
Just because of that.
I mean, I was dying, but but just simply because that was the recommendation, right? And it was a purposeful appointment, that phone call, and it was a purposeful appointment because God was teaching me about like frequencies. He was teaching me about the need for the cell-to-cell dialogue to have to get into frequency with something that puts off the same energetic frequency as us.
Which is homeopathy. Which has been completely squashed because of allopathic medicine.
Totally. And it was the source of healing over in Germany. Again, we're going back to German. Again, thank you.
Yeah.
Right? You know, Hoffman. But yes, right? So if we understand that like frequency, life sustains life, right? And I will say to clients, if you can show me the thing that sucks on a soybean for its source of life, then you and I can have a conversation.
Okay.
But no life is sustained off of sucking on soybean.
Right.
Right? It can support the body, it can feed the body, it can offer it what it needs culturally in the Asian culture.
Mm-hmm.
But anything that's been genetically modified or taken from its original source of growth and altered so that it can be sustainable in our biodynamic fields offers a very different pathology for us, right? We'll be influenced differently.
Absolutely.
However, I believe, again, we're over consuming even meats today.
Yes, and that's something.
So to argue meat versus vegan, I can tell you, if you're feeling lousy while you're eating meat, when you make that transition to a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet, you feel great for a period of time until the conversation begins to lose its intensity. And then it starts looking for what it knows it needs to sustain life. And that's the protein found in meat.
But instead of that, oftentimes you'll go further down the extreme where you're like, okay, I was vegetarian, now I'm going vegan. I'm going to cut this out.
Right.
And then you have vegans.
And then you feel great for a little period of time. And then again, eventually, and then it's raw versus cooked, right? There's the raw food diet. And again, all of these things are foods, all of the fads, all of these are diets, all of these are recommendations that they've done over the period of time. But there are foundational principles that are necessary to sustain life.
Right.
And protein is one of them. Not the overconsumption. Look, a 16-ounce steak is not good for anyone. I don't care, right?
Yeah.
But if you're taking a 16-ounce steak and you're cutting it down into a 3-ounce proportion, your body metabolically will benefit from a 3-ounce steak as opposed to a large bowl of vegan foods that majority of them are processed because they're not from their original sourcing, right? It's not like I can go and pick up all of the ingredients of some of the things that are found in those foods. And now you're getting processed foods that are keto friendly. You're getting processed foods that are paleo friendly. Gluten-free.
Yeah.
But they're processed foods.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not real foods. You know, you can't go to a tree and pluck it and eat it, right? It's in a packaged form.
Right.
And so I'm a huge fan of going the farther it is from its sourcing, the more dangerous it is for the host itself. So, and most vegans and vegetarians have to eat a lot of food over the course of the day. Right. Their blood sugars are destroyed.
Right, absolutely. So it's kind of that all day long.
They're consuming.
All day long, yeah.
Or they're juicing. And we were not designed to drink our foods.
Right.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have teeth.
Or hydrochloric acid. Or, many other things.
Many other things,
Yeah.
right? But I mean, there were dinosaurs that had flat teeth that were all plant-based.
Mm-hmm.
They hosted history in a very different way.
Yeah.
But your meat eaters were the ones that were like, forging great grounds, and that was the T-Rex.
Yeah.
I mean, we could either have sometimes I tell people that are vegans or vegetarians, if you look really closely, they begin to look like the plants that they eat.
Mm-hmm. They do?
They do. I mean, they lose muscle tone, they have no internalized strength, they begin, even emotionally, become very difficult to handle. Emotional stress is being placed on them. I'm not being critical, I'm just being what I've noticed in 17 years.
Right.
And those who are sustained, there are turkeys, there are chickens, and then there are turkeys.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so a lot of dialogue there, a lot of good information.
Yeah.
What would be your kind of closing to wrap this all up in a nice pretty bow and hand it to a client or hand it to somebody who is like, I don't know what to eat, or how about this?
So I'm a huge fan. If you're unsure of what to eat, start with one meal a day, just one meal a day, and make the decision that you're going to eat one meal a day and give 5 to 7 hours on both sides of that meal.
Mm-hmm. So not just in terms that you're not saying do like the one meal a day thing,
right.
But to choose a meal. Let's say it's your lunch meal, and I say I'm gonna wait 5 hours until I eat dinner.
Correct.
Okay.
And I'm gonna wait 5 hours after I eat my breakfast before I have that lunch meal.
Okay.
And you will find that you actually are sustaining a lot more. That you've got a lot more energy, a lot more focus, a lot more. Your bowel movements will regulate themselves. Mm-hmm. And I'm also a huge fan of an apple a day.
Yeah.
Apple a day.
It really does.
It keep the doctor away.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it just does.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it keeps the bile thin. It makes the liver gallbladder happy. Mm-hmm. We've got miles of bile ducts that can get backed up with emotional stress, physical stress. That apple just really does take a lot of anger out of the liver. And then we become nicer people. That's why we're so awesome.
Because we eat an apple a day.
An apple a day.
All right. Any other last tips or things that you'd like to share or?
Excuse me. So I think we have to be very aware of our climate today. Mm-hmm. I think we have to be very aware of our physical climate, not climate change, because that's a conversation for another time. But I'm talking about physical climate, meaning the people we surround ourselves with. I think we have to be very conscientious of our emotional climate, how we're responding to the people around us, right?
Yeah.
How we're viewing our food. Is our food fuel that is sourcing us to be able to move our stories forward in a way that's honoring to what God is asking of us? Mm-hmm. And when we think about that, then we can find ourselves in a place where we can then confront the big question, and that's where are we at spiritually? Okay. So many people try to jump ahead and go full bore into the spiritual world, but they're so imbalanced in some of the other areas.
So many things like stories in the Bible. Jesus fed people first.
He fed them first.
He clothed them. He fed them. He gave them water, and then he gave them the word. So we can't just jump into the.
We cannot.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan of always saying start there. Mm-hmm. The spiritual world is the higher level of healing, and it is vitally important. But there is physical, there is the energetic, and then there is the mental bodies that need to be addressed first in order for us to find that state of where we are quiet enough internally to be able to go before the throne and hear what the Lord has to say. So I believe that if we cut off the chatter and the chaos that is out there, we can get back to really the way God intended us to be fueling our systems. Right. And we will not overburden our digestive system, and will be more readily available for his service. Awesome. That's my big takeaway. There you go.
That's a great way to wrap this all up. So thank you for joining us on Come Draw from the Well. Cynthia will be joining us again, and we're going to be having lots of dialogues. We already touched on some of the things and alluded to what we're going to be talking about. But tune in for our next episode of Come Draw from the Well.
Yeah, for sure. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.